Let's do a throwback segment here, courtesy of the YouTube channel Nerds Make Media. So this is Noam Chomsky, the brilliant linguist and political scholar, and he's discussing Adam Smith. Now, Adam Smith is typically viewed today as a conservative economics guy, and he's viewed as a supporter of free markets and what they call the invisible hand of the marketplace, which is the idea that if you leave the market alone with no government regulation, then it'll take care of itself and everything will work fantastically. Now, that's the perception of Adam Smith that most people have today. Let's listen to Chomsky break it down, though, and explain a whole bunch of misconceptions about Smith.
Adam Smith is very rarely read. He's worshipped, but not read. So, for example, everyone's heard of the phrase invisible hand, but almost no one knows how he used it. The term invisible hand actually does appear in his classic Wealth of Nations once. It appears in an argument against what's now called neoliberalism, what's now called neoclassical economics that we're supposed to worship. So we're supposed to worship Adam Smith and neoclassical economics, and they radically differ on the notion invisible hand. Adam Smith was concerned, as David Ricardo later was, that if there was free movement of capital and free import of goods, he was concerned about England. He said England will suffer because British capitalists will invest abroad and they'll import from abroad, and that'll harm the English economy. Ricardo had similar concerns. And Adam Smith then gave an argument. It was not a very good argument, but his argument was that English investors will prefer to invest in England because of what some called a home bias. They'll have a preference for investing close by, and therefore, as if by an invisible hand, England will be saved from the menace of free capital movement and of free imports. That's invisible hand. What's that got to do with the Cato Institute or the modern enthusiasm about free capital flow and having U.S. corporations invest in China so they can send stuff back here to sell cheap, exploiting Chinese workers? That's not Adam Smith.
This is fascinating because you guys know, man, I'm an economics nerd, a politics nerd, a philosophy nerd, a current events nerd, and that's how this show has come about and how I've done it so consistently and all the time. And I had been totally duped by the thing that he's describing right there. See, the argument was, and most people believe this to this day, that when you bring up conservative economics, people say, oh, Adam Smith. Right, Adam Smith gave the intellectual credibility to the idea that deregulation always works, and that this Ayn Rand version of capitalism where it's unfettered, laissez-faire, rugged free market capitalism and individualism, that always works. That always works best. Less government, the better. That's what people thought. That's what I thought Adam Smith was all about. Turns out he's like, no. The only time he mentions the invisible hand, I almost said indivisible hand, invisible hand in his works is when it comes to letting businesses go overseas, so getting rid of protectionism and getting rid of tariffs, which keep, for example, American businesses in America, right? What he says is, well, if you get rid of those rules and you allow corporations like GM to go to Mexico or places to go to different companies to go to Bangladesh or China, right, and exploit the labor for cheap and then send the goods back here to sell for cheap, right? He says, no, that won't happen. Even if you get rid of the rules, what would happen is, as if there's an individual, I can't say that word, invisible hand, okay, the businesses will choose to stay in the U.S. because they have a home bias. So even if you get rid of the rules, it'll work, and people will act in a protectionist way anyway, and they won't exploit overseas labor because they'll have a home bias, and it's like an invisible hand is keeping them in the U.S. Well, guess what? History has proven that argument was 100% incorrect. It couldn't have been more wrong. We have companies, even when they're not technically allowed to do things out of the U.S., they try to find a way to go out of the U.S. The inversion tax cheat is a perfect example. The tax havens in the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas and elsewhere, the fact that we have all these different factories in China and in areas where people get paid 27 cents for what a worker in America would have to be paid $15.75 an hour for. He was 100% wrong. He could not have been more wrong. In fact, that's such a bad point, it ruins your credibility in my eyes. Like, I don't know if you could recover from that. Like, that's such a bad point and so inaccurate, such a horrible prediction, that it's kind of like the prediction of Mitt Romney's going to win in a landslide, like George Will made and Rush Limbaugh made and a bunch of Larry Kudlow and a bunch of fucking conservative clowns made. That's how bad that point is. And Chomsky's like, people don't even get Adam Smith. Like, we create these caricatures of what people believe in our minds, and then we just run with it, you know? And look, this happens a lot with Karl Marx, too. I've always said about Karl Marx that his critique of capitalism, there's never been a more accurate critique of capitalism. It's 100% correct. It is brilliant. It is genius. I disagree with Marx in terms of his solution, right? But people make this mistake of pigeonholing him, right? Not even necessarily knowing what he stands for and just saying, I dismiss everything he's ever done ever because I disagree with that one little thing. Well, it's the same thing with Adam Smith. People go, I agree with him because I heard that one thing about the invisible hand, even though I have no fucking clue what the invisible hand is really about. So there's Noam Chomsky, man. Brilliant guy, busting up myths left and right.